Hi, everyone. I'm Ken Jacobson, Senior Documentary Programmer, AFI Festivals, and I want to welcome you to the AFI Docs 2021 Industry Forum and to this session, PHILLY D.A, the making of the landmark new independent lens docuseries, Part 1. First, I want to thank our sponsor of the forum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I also want to thank our AFI members. You're very special to us, and our audience, you're just as special. And finally, I want to thank our moderator and all of our panelists, as well as our ASL interpreters. A special thanks to Michael and Roy and Sherry at ITVS for their partnership on this panel. So why are we doing a two-part panel, 2.5 hours in all on PHILLY D.A? First and foremost, it's because as soon as I saw the first 2 episodes at Sundance, I was instantly hooked, and it hit me how ambitious and path-breaking and brilliantly crafted this series is. A true 360-degree look at a critically important civic institution as it undergoes change and resistance to change. And granted, that was after just seeing the first 2 episodes. Second, we've never honed in on the docuseries form at AFI Docs before, and we felt it was high time that we did so. It's an important and growing part of our industry. So, in concert with the filmmakers and ITVS, we decided to embark on this in-depth forensic analysis of what makes this brilliant series tick. For those of you who have not yet seen PHILLY D.A, run, don't walk to your nearest device. The series is streaming now on the PBS video app and pbs.org. Please note that if you have questions, please include those in the chat and we will feed those to the moderator for our Q&A at the end. Speaking of which, today's moderator, Chung, is VP of Production at ITVS. And I'm just going to name our panelists by first name. They will be introducing themselves in just a moment. And it's also my chance to thank them all. Yoni, Ted, Nicole, Josh, and Ruben. Unfortunately, Don Porter is traveling and unlikely to be able to join us this morning, but thanks to Don as well. I also want to thank Jill and Shannon, our interpreters. So Roy, the show is yours. Thanks for leading our discussion today. Please take it away.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you to AFI Docs. I'm Roy Chung. I'm an Asian man with short black hair and a blue button-down shirt. I have a blue background that says ITVS on it. It's great to be here on behalf of ITVS. Each year, with support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, we partner and co-produce with independent filmmakers to bring more than 40 documentary films to the American public. Our mandate is to bring underrepresented voices to public media through the work of these filmmakers who share stories that build empathy and inspire change. A couple of years ago, we formed a multi-year partnership with PBS called Stories for Justice. We are bringing more than 20 projects tackling the criminal justice system to PBS through our flagship series, Independent Lens. Some of the projects that are part of Stories for Justice include documentary feature films such as Down a Dark Stairwell by Ursula Liang and Always in Season by Jackie Olive. Stories for Justice also includes short films for journalism outlets, as well as docuseries, including A Town Called Victoria by Lee Liu and Anthony Padone, coming to PBS next year, and The Dallas Project by Darius Clark Monroe and Seth Gordon. Which brings us to PHILLY D.A, our first Stories for Justice docuseries out of the gate. The series premiered at Sundance this year and had its broadcast and streaming launch on PBS in April. PHILLY D.A features unprecedented access to the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office and an unfiltered look at the DA himself, Larry Krasner. When we at ITVS and Independent Lens heard about the series by filmmakers Yoni Brook, Ted Passon, and Nicole Salazar, we were intrigued to say the least. And when we were able to watch the footage that the team had captured during multiple years of being embedded with the DA's office, we were hooked. The series was everything we were looking for in terms of advancing understanding about the criminal justice system and having the potential to spark dialogue in communities about how to reform the system. But it did so in such an entertaining, brilliant way, as Ken mentioned, that it's no wonder that the series has drawn comparisons to scripted series such as The Wire and has been called one of the best TV shows of the year to date by outlets such as Time. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome the team behind the project to break down how they did it and to share their experiences making this groundbreaking docuseries. While we invite the team up to our virtual stage, here's a quick look at PHILLY D.A.
Voters in Philadelphia have chosen a progressive as their new district attorney. You want to be safe, you don't need this many jails.
My guys don't trust you. What am I to tell them?
I suggest you don't shoot unarmed people in the back.
There's no mass incarceration.
This will be controversial.
The DA's office is not a place a social experiment should be conducted.
You're being lied to.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you all. Thanks for being here. I'd love to take a minute to do some quick intros. Ted, if you could kick us off.
Hi, my name is Ted Passon. I'm a white male with large glasses and brown hair and a black t-shirt. And I am one of the directors, creators, and producers of PHILLY D.A.
Hi, my name is Yoni Brook. I'm a white man with thinning brown hair and a black t-shirt. I'm sitting in my my son's bedroom in Philadelphia.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Salazar. I'm a white woman with messy brown hair and a black button-down t-shirt sitting in my bedroom office in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm one of the co-creators and creative producer of PHILLY D.A.
Hi, I'm Josh Penn. I'm one of the producers. I'm a white male with messy brown hair and a big bushy beard. And yeah, it's great to be here.
Hi, I'm Ruben Daniels, one of the editors of PHILLY D.A. I'm a black male with a black beard and a black t-shirt.
Thank you all again for taking the time to be here. I also want to take a quick second to acknowledge some of the others who aren't on the panel, but who were integral to the project, including producers Michael Gottwald and James Doolittle, Aaron O'Flaherty, who is our day-to-day executive at PBS, and Independent Lens executive producer Lois Vossen, and series producer Amy Shatsky. For those of you in the audience today, we'll have a Q&A with the filmmakers during this discussion, so please write your questions into this chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the panel. So first of all, congratulations to all of you on the amazing season, which had its finale at the beginning of this month. But let's dive right into it. We know that we ended up with an 8-part series on PBS, but how did it all start? Did you know that this would turn out to be what it is when you started following around Larry Krasner years ago? Ted, Yoni, I'll toss that to you guys.
I would say we definitely did not know what this would turn into. Yeah, we actually had the idea that this was going to be, maybe a short film about just an interesting election. And then it just kind of grew exponentially from there. And the way the whole thing started was that I kind of came up in Philadelphia. I had a lot of friends who were activists who had been represented by Larry Krasner over the years. I'd heard his name, had his phone number written on my arm at protests. He was a known quantity in Philly. He was like the go-to activist lawyer, but I'd never actually met him. And a friend had called and said, "Hey, get this, that guy Larry Krasner is running for district attorney. Isn't that hilarious?" And that was kind of the tenor of our whole conversation. Like, oh, what a hilarious stunt that he's gonna run for district attorney and claim to, want to use the office to end mass incarceration when he was by far the most, his reputation was so diametrically opposed to what we'd always known the district attorney had always been in Philadelphia. It's a very punitive system in Philadelphia. But it just seemed like, of course he's not going to win. We never thought for a second he was going to win, but what an interesting conversation he's starting. So maybe we can start filming something around this interesting election. And then when he won, then suddenly the whole thing just got way bigger. And we were just like, oh, okay, well, the real story is like, is he going to actually be able to do any of this stuff? Why? Why not? Like, how does this happen? What happens when you bring in people who are so, spent their whole, 30-year career fighting an institution and now running that institution? What happens when an outsider, goes inside to power and becomes the institution? And so we just started showing up at the district attorney's office and realized that, our story was about to get a whole lot bigger.
And I'll just add that I think one of the really unique aspects of this project is that Ted and I are both based and live in Philadelphia. And so Ted, when Larry became the DA, we were kind of uniquely situated. Ted's company, All Ages Productions, has an office across the street from the DA's office. And so before we had any funding, before we knew what this was, probably for the first 6 months, Ted and I would just walk across the street and try to, we would get waved into the DA's office by the DA's security team, and we didn't really have a plan. Our plan was just to soak it up and talk to whoever would talk to us in the DA's office. And there was a lot of skepticism of the project, both from Larry's team, the DA's team, who said, you just don't let unaffiliated independent filmmakers, we don't know what their agenda is, we don't totally know who they are, wander around the DA's office. What are they making here? And then also resistance from people who had spent maybe 30 years in the DA's office and weren't used to having camera crews knock on their door and ask them to do an impromptu interview. So it was a real kind of, it was a strange time at the DA's office because Larry Krasner, the consummate outsider, was now the insider. And so I think we just sort of, we were not the craziest thing happening there at that moment. There was a lot of other turmoil, and that helped us to just get our foot in the door and then become part of the furniture that people expected, that when Larry Krasner was a DA, you might have a camera crew asking you questions.
And at what point did you say this is more than a short, this is more than a feature, this is a series?
It's a good question. I think we started to realize as we were going, as soon as he won and he got in office, we're like, okay, this is probably a feature. And then we started filming. We started looking for different storylines that we would follow, knowing that for a feature we'd probably have to reduce it down to 2, maybe 3 max, probably 2. And as we kept going, we started really falling in love with all these different storylines, and we started realizing how the power of the district attorney is so huge. But to really understand how huge it is, you kind of need to see it play out in all these different arenas. And one nice thing is all the different storylines kind of showed you that power in a different way. And we kept doing this exercise of thinking, okay, if we had to pare this down to 1 or 2 storylines, what would they be? And we just couldn't imagine. We just couldn't crack the code on what is a version of this. What are those 1 or 2 storylines that we could reduce this down to that would actually be a good story and that would actually do the subject matter justice. And we just couldn't figure it out. And we just kept coming back to, God, it would just be so much better if we could tell more of the stories, because it's just a better, more comprehensive document.
And we didn't want to make the Larry Krasner feature documentary. I think we could know how that would go. And I think we were a little nervous about kind of just making that kind of simplistic idea of while the district attorney and a local prosecutor is hugely important, and most people don't realize how much policy influence their local DA wields on what is considered a crime, what kind of sentences are there, how are sentences disproportionately affecting different people in their communities. People don't realize a DA is that important. It's not the story of just a DA. It's a story of an entire system that a DA is kind of the linchpin of. And so I think we realized that, and after about a year of mostly Ted and I and our kind of core editing team looking at it, we started to try to make this more of a legitimate project, which is why we brought on Nicole and Josh and other folks who could help us expand the scope of what this could be.
Yeah, and I think, I came on about a year into the project, and already, Ted and Yoni had amassed such incredible access and had started filming a lot of different storylines. And it kind of was clear to me that doing just a feature wouldn't really even do justice to the access and all the filming they'd already done. That there was a way in which, this incredible opportunity had been presented where, even though, Larry could not mandate that anybody in his office would speak to us, right? But because he had let us in the door and they had already started building all these relationships, it's an office of 600 people. It really, and by sort of starting to build those relationships and see that there was, filming to do with not only Larry, but also his core team, and then also some of the old guard prosecutors, there was just, such an opportunity to dig in further. It kind of seemed a waste to not try and figure out, is there a way to really expand beyond it? And I think also, so many of us, I don't think really understand the power of a DA. So even just sort of understanding, what Ted was laying out, the monumentality of having this DA with a different perspective, sort of establishing that in the first episode, which was a huge challenge, but then to also help the audience understand, what is a DA? What is this immense power that they have? But then also what are the limits? And you really only see that by not only looking within the institution, but then also by branching out, by seeing, how he interacts with the other institutions that make up this ecosystem of the criminal legal system in Philadelphia, whether it's, city council or judges, but but then also, of course, the people who are impacted by the system. And so to really be able to show what that office is in its entirety, it just felt like, Larry Krasner is just kind of the lens, and through there, really what becomes interesting is showing all of these relationships and how these dynamics play out.
Why was Larry into it? Why did he allow the access?
Well, actually, we talked to him about that in the beginning, obviously, and for him, what he presented to us in the beginning, because in some ways you have to be a little bit skeptical about why anyone is going to give you access into their life, and trying to figure out maybe how they understand it. But kind of what he told us is that he really, and it's true. I mean, we're around him for a long time. He really does feel like the progressive prosecutor movement is the next stage of the civil rights movement. He really, truly, and sincerely believes that this is a crucial next step for the criminal justice system. And it's really important to him that other people like him, other people who never imagined they could be district attorney, would run to fill that seat. And so the idea was that if people could see him do it, if they could see behind the scenes, if they could see what worked for him, what didn't work for him, the successes, the failures, and demystify the process by showing, kind of how messy it was, that maybe it would inspire other people who, like him, were outsiders, never imagined themselves in the office, that maybe seeing him do it, they could imagine themselves doing it, maybe it would inspire them to run. And he also just in general, it also seemed like in some ways, a really big issue for him as a defense attorney was bringing transparency to the DA's office, which was, historically incredibly opaque. So in some ways, I think he enjoyed seeing the reaction of the prosecutors who had been there for a long time, at seeing a film crew in there. I think he was just like, it was a great way for him to say, like, this is a new era. We're doing things differently now.
I'd love to hear what it took to start pitching the project as a series. Josh, from a pitching and fundraising standpoint, what about the process of producing a docuseries was different than a feature film, and also what drew you to the project?
Sure. What drew me to the project was, the first thing I watched is what ended up being the first scene in the whole series, that first big policy meeting, and I saw it and I immediately was kind of blown away. I knew about Larry. I met Yoni, and excuse me, he told me he was filming this, and then he showed me that, and I was like, this is like watching The West Wing, except it's real life. This is incredible, and I was kind of immediately hooked. I think the biggest difference between pitching a feature and in a series is this is my first series that I've ever produced. And most features I've produced, I've sold after, like, you raise all the money and then you sell it you premiere it at a festival, and then you sell it to a distributor and figure out how to get it out. And there's not really the same kind of market for that for series. It happens, but you run much higher chance of just like not finding a normal path into the world. And that means the people who can help you make it it's a smaller group, because to some extent, like, there's always someone else who has a checkbook that can help you get to the next shoot. But there's not always another TV channel or streamer with a huge audience. And so we had to pitch it, earlier in the process than we maybe would have had we decided to keep it a feature, and to a very select group of people. So we didn't do it in the earliest. We were, I think, 18 months into filming by the time we went around and showed it to people. And, had a bunch of scenes. We had a sizzle reel. And so it wasn't totally left to their imagination, which is probably helpful and unhelpful to some extent. Like, someone's imagination can be a helpful tool as well in pitching. Everyone can imagine their favorite thing they've ever seen. But it felt like the right point in the process for us to pitch this. But then the other thing I'll say about that is, not only are there smaller groups of people, but the vast majority of people who have the ability to do a series, this isn't a small scope series. Like, we shot for years and need to edit for years, and had not a huge team, but we had a lot of editors. Most of the places are really giant entities. It's it's major TV channels and major corporations. And then you find, fortunately, you find there's also public broadcasting, which was really a godsend for us and was a very different kind of process and conversation once we started talking to ITVS and PBS.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think, oh, Nicole, are you sorry?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think, one of the challenges here is that, you go to a lot of places that maybe are more in the entertainment space, and they hear about prosecutors and they think it's maybe going to be true crime and it's going to be, sort of these mysteries that sort of thrillingly pull you along. Or they're maybe looking for, a big celebrity to be the thing that's going to pull their audience in. So I think, one of the challenges that we had, and part of why we were so lucky to land at PBS, is just really finding a partner that would understand that even though this is, a local story about Philadelphia, it actually would have, broad appeal and have broad relevance to people all across the country. I know when we were, going out, we would be told that, well, an international audience isn't going to be interested, or like, why would anybody care about what's just happening in Philadelphia? And so it took a while to sort of find the right partnership of somebody who would understand that it's not, even though, it is entertaining and it is engaging, and we, it was very important to us that people would find a way to get pulled from one episode to the next, that it wasn't just about that. It was also, a journalistic project that we thought had broad, social utility, just in terms of civic engagement and informing folks. And I think, when we found PBS and Topic, like those were really entities that understood that mission and really did see that there would be an audience for it. And that was really key for us in terms of just being able to have that partnership while we were also putting the project together, that intention was sort of mutual.
Yeah, just to add on to that I think one of the challenges in saying that we're going to do a film about prosecutors, but we can't ever be in a courtroom, is that, sometimes you get to that point in the pitch conversation, and it's like, so what about that big trial? And like, what about that big, whodunit, as Nicole was alluding to? And I think, we felt that doubt, to be honest with you, as well, as we were in the beginning of developing the project, of like, well, what kind of film will this be? Because I love, The Staircase, like I love those shows, and I want to see those shows. But when we started talking to experts and reading more about it, you realize that those shows are the aberration in the American legal system. Like 95% of people don't get a trial or a jury of their peers. It's plea deals, it's policies that are made by the prosecutor's office, kind of off to the sides in the shadows. And so, in a way, if you want to examine mass incarceration, you should be looking at the prosecutor's office, because so few shows get that opportunity to do that. Now, I think the trick for us and the lucky thing for us in the whole process is that we had characters like Larry Krasner who could make that policy stuff exciting. And then we also did a lot of the legwork to find voices of people from the police and the judiciary and impacted individuals to bring that out. But I think that was a bit of a question for us. And I think it did come up in the pitching process as well.
Yeah, it was, in some ways, the burden was on us to convince a lot of these networks and streamers that, like, from their standpoint, it was like, well, what is the genre that this fits into that we can see the exact map it's going to follow? And we were kind of like, well, it's like kind of like these other genres, but not exactly. It's kind of this new thing. And, that was a burden for us, because, we had to prove to them that it would still actually be exciting. It would still be interesting. We actually heard a lot from people. We were pitching this in a pre-George Floyd America, and we heard a lot from networks like, we just don't know if people are really interested in criminal justice issues like this. We just don't know if people are really gonna like be interested in what they're talking about. I don't know, and Larry Krasner is he's just not really famous enough. Yeah, some people have heard of him, but and that was kind of the stuff that we ran into. And then the whole issue about oh, it's just so local. We would hear that. We actually changed the title for a while to American Prosecutor, because we thought maybe that would assuage those concerns that it was too local. We're like, every story happens somewhere, it doesn't really seem like that should matter, but apparently I think to network execs, if it happens in New York or LA, it's a universal story. If it happens where they live, it's universal. If it happens anywhere else, it's really local, and who cares? But thankfully, you know, when we had our meetings with PBS and also with Topic, those were just markedly different. You know, those are the first times where we were never convincing people that these issues were of interest and that they would be important and that, you know, people would care. And so, you know, you could just feel it as soon as we got in the room that it was going to be different.
I do want to give a shout out to our partners at Topic, the streaming service that was also a co-production partner on the project. Jeff Seelbach and his team were so great to work with. How did that come about?
I've known Topic. Topic does a bunch of interesting things, and so we've done a bunch of projects with different departments. And we took the film, when it was a film, we took it through Sundance Catalyst, which is a program Sundance runs where they kind of bring in, I don't know, 10 projects a year and put you in front of a bunch of different, like 50 different funders, and you do a presentation, then people say, oh, I'm interested. And it's actually the way we got through most of our shooting was through that funding. And a different department at Topic was there and immediately said, we want to do this project. And it didn't, because we weren't sure if it was a feature or series at that point, we said, hold off. Let's figure that out before we take your money. And then when we figured out it was a series, we brought it back to them, and immediately in the meeting, it was like, oh, these people just get this. It's there was a match, and they're a streamer only, which is actually increasingly with all the different corporations buying each other or TV channels launching their own streamers, it's increasingly rare that there's a streamer that's not affiliated with a TV channel in some way. So it was actually worked out really well. The two places that we felt like they just kind of inherently got it, kind of had different, while PBS has streaming, it's primarily a TV channel, increasingly a streamer as well, but we were able to fit the two together, and so it worked out really well.
Great. And how about the path to PBS and Independent Lens?
I think we had been in touch with Lois early on because we got some grants from either Ford and IDA. And so I think, you know, the IL team and ITVS team were sort of tracking those. And then I've had the opportunity to work with ITVS on 3 different projects. So I think, you know, there was a lot of trust there from that side. And I think we also talked to, you know, Aaron and Pam at PBS kind of simultaneous to that. So it was sort of like all roads were converging. It felt like, you know, the PBS team and the ITVS IL team kind of understood what this project could be, and in ways that I think other entities did not.
Well, as I said at the top of the panel, you know, we at ITVS and Independent Lens were so excited when we saw the pitch deck and the sizzle. Once it was shared with us, it spread like wildfire throughout the building, and I know we jumped on it pretty quickly. I want to talk about the process. You know, once it was greenlit. Ruben, I'm curious. You know, you've been on the editing side of other series, including Steve James' City So Real, and you also work on features. How is it different? You know, there's this wealth of material. How is it different working on a series versus a feature film as an editor?
Yeah, I think the main difference is just the vast amount of content and just stories that can go all these different ways. So I think that's the beauty of Philly D.A. is like you kind of, if it was a feature, you don't necessarily get everybody's perspective, but with it being a series, you get perspective from the judges, the cops, you know, of course, the DA, of other DAs, you know, people on the street, the victims, like everybody that we're able to cover that and broadly cover that. So I think with a feature, you know, it's all pared down to like, you know, 90 minutes, 2 hours, and you don't necessarily get that benefit of kind of giving everybody's story, everybody's side, everybody's perspective.
Now, you know, when it came to PBS and Independent Lens, it was initially greenlit for 5 episodes, and then it became 8 once we saw, again, the wealth of great content you have. How do you figure out just how to make that into 8 distinct episodes? Where do you even begin?
it was a lot of guess and check. I'd love to say that we were really brilliant and we had it all figured out from the beginning, but we really didn't. We really thought we had actually we had thought originally it was 6 episodes, and then we were like, nah, you know, maybe it really should be 5. Maybe we're going to be a little too long on this. Maybe 5 is the right number. And then when we started to actually, you know, just iterate more and just edit more and just get more down, we just started realizing how much time it was going to really take to tell these stories, that we couldn't do some things as quickly as we thought we could. And it was really in creating the first 2 rough cuts for PBS that we kind of, you know, they each came in at something like 2 hours, you know, for each episode was like 2 hours. And so we just kind of realized like, okay, we're off base here. And we kind of just went and kind of like ran the numbers and said like, okay, if it's taking, you know, so long to tell this story, and these are all the different things that we think need to be told, if we apply that metric across the board, that was kind of how we came up with 8 episodes. And then even in the like telling of the episodes, like you know, before we even got to that point, we had done all this work and even just figuring out what the structure of a typical episode of the show would even look like. You know, in the beginning, we kind of thought we were going to have all of these through stories that would go through the run of the series. And then we just kind of realized it's just a garbled mess. It's too much. The stories are too complicated. There's too many characters. You can't do that. You need like one very simple through story, which is just Larry in the office and how they're evolving slowly from outsiders to insiders. And then each episode needs to have its own distinct arc. But it took us a couple of failures of putting some things together and realizing that they were terrible before we kind of cracked the code and realized that that was the structure that was going to work best for the series.
It's kind of amazing when I think back to all the note cards that we had on the wall and sort of some of the crazy iterations that we thought would work. But now I look at them and I realize they're complete insanity. You know, it's like you wouldn't know who anybody is. You wouldn't know anything that was happening, especially when they're talking about, you know, these different legal things that, you know, unless you really kind of unpack them for a little while, I think the audience would be totally lost. So it was definitely a learning as you go experience. I mean, I'd never even made a feature before, so I didn't have like a boilerplate for how you do that either. Not that there is a boilerplate, they're all very different, but it was really a period of exploration and experimentation to kind of, you know, figure out, okay, you know, every episode can maybe have 2 storylines, something in the office, something outside the office. Like, you know, Larry can't really have more than 1 mission per episode, otherwise you kind of get lost. So it was really interesting, actually, as we were working through it to come up with sort of some of our own kind of guiding principles and rules that helped us kind of make sense of the material and kind of have some restrictions on all the hundreds of hours that we had, a way to make sense of it.
And I'll also add one other thing, just that this relates to, you know, Ruben, maybe Ruben, you'll have your own perspective on this, but there's also this idea of like series-wide arcs and, you know, how does this feel like it's cohesive across all 8 episodes once it became 8 episodes. And so, you know, there were sort of what I would say are like pivotal scenes that we knew would elicit different emotions that should come at different points in the series. For example, there's a moment where Larry breaks down and cries. And we know that couldn't happen in the first probably 3 episodes. It would feel too much. You hadn't earned it yet. But then there were other storylines, like I think we'll talk later about the murder of David Jones by a Philadelphia police officer, where we, as we were still editing, thought the story might have a chance of like ending and resolving and there being a verdict or a verdict, let's say, in the story. And it became clear as we got deeper and deeper into the edit that this story was going to be unresolved. And so, you know, I remember that all of us were, you know, and it's probably caused palpitations at ITVS, was like, well, maybe this should actually be the last episode. It shouldn't be the penultimate episode. And we had to experiment with that and think about that. And yeah, I'd be curious Ruben's perspective on that moment, because we were always asking you, Ruben, like, well, what did you do on America to Me? You know?
Yeah, I definitely think I agree. And the difference with America to Me is too, a lot of times where America to Me and City So Rare, we had the election. So we knew the election was ending and somebody was going to be mayor. America to Me, we knew everybody that were seniors were graduating and the school year was ending. So we had like a set ending point, which was, you know, easier for us because we were in this time frame of, oh, the election is going to take place during this time. The school year is only a year. We're going to end it there. So with this, I know we had a lot of talk about COVID. Do we end it there? David Jones, do we just, you know, keep and pray and hoping that something comes down? And as far as the Supreme Court decision and all that. So I think it was definitely a jumbling kind of mess at first, but just trying to figure out how do we play into it. And a lot of stuff is like, we were granted a lot of access, but then we eventually was like, okay, well, we can't show this stuff with David Jones, we can't show that. So like, we had to play it up with like doors being closed in our face and really like kind of add that to the story of like, okay, well, this is the reality of the situation. You know, stuff just doesn't get some stuff just doesn't get closed or resolved all the way. You know, like this is the reality of being in the DA's office. So.
Yeah, and we should probably say that all of this, so we were still kind of like moving the deck chairs, you know, even like towards the end of our edit schedule. And our edit schedule was what, maybe about 40 weeks or so, like that was like officially contracted. But thankfully, because of our funders that came in through Sundance and through some other places, we had some funding to start the editing process almost a year prior. And so we had a team of people who were working on figuring out, you know, because we were shooting footage faster than we could even watch it, you know, so we had editors from the beginning who were just starting to string out, you know, what first was by topic. And then when we kind of realized when topics morphed into, okay, but this is an actual storyline, then they would kind of change it to what we thought the storyline was. And we still had it almost like a year of prep to start to organize all of these things before the real edit schedule started. And then even then, it kind of felt like we were just racing up against the wall and we're constantly running out of time. So it was.
And we should give a hat tip to Gordon Quinn, who was one of the you know, gave us great advice on kind of putting together those like story edits in a way that then we could think about how that would get braided across the series, or even just pushed down into one episode. So that was sort of one of the impetuses of that kind of editing structure, to make sense of it. Because in reality, one thing the series doesn't really tell you is that a lot of this stuff is happening all at the same time, you know, and it would be like we would be shooting in one day a scene from episode 2 and a scene from episode 6 or 7. And you know, the series as a work of cinema, whatever quote unquote that means, is sometimes playing with time in a way, because everything just always happens all at once, unfortunately.
What was some of that technical process, including working with not just one, but several editors, not in the same place? Of course, this was during COVID as well. How did you manage all of that?
Right, the COVID challenge was really tricky, and you know, we weren't prepared to have everybody working remotely. So we ended up investing in a server system that had this kind of new function to it, where when footage is uploaded to the server, it automatically compresses all of the footage into a proprietary codec that is really small, and all of the editors could then go on to the server and just download the footage that was uploaded. So if we were shooting new stuff, we could always keep everybody current and make sure that their drives locally matched the server and that everything was together. And then we had assistant editors who were kind of just making sure that like nothing went wrong, if there was server issues. I mean, you know, to add that technical challenge definitely created like more technical problems. But in some ways it made the remote editing possible in a way that maybe it wouldn't have been before. And then otherwise it was just good old fashioned sending drives through the mail and things like that. And all of our edit sessions were over Zoom, which has its pluses and minuses for sure. But that's kind of how we were forced to make it work.
Yeah, I don't think we've even, I've never met Ruben in person.
That's true. But that was also one of the great perks of working remotely, is that we probably couldn't have worked with Ruben otherwise, because he's in Chicago and we're in Philadelphia. And in the beginning, when we were looking for editors, it was we were only considering people who would be willing to at least commute to Philadelphia or move to Philadelphia part-time. And that probably wouldn't have been possible. So in some ways it was to our great benefit that the world shut down for a year. So
I will say I think one of the challenges of it is that you never really get to watch things together as a group. Or we would try sort of doing these elaborate things where we all hit play at the same time to try and have the screening experience and kind of watch on Zoom people's reactions. So I think there is just from a story and sort of team perspective, it's a little trickier when you're kind of all watching cuts and then putting in notes and then having to talk about it. It kind of has a different sort of lag effect. You don't really get that immediacy, but yeah, at the end of the day, it luckily it worked out. I mean, it's fun sometimes if your internet's working well, it's nice to be able to kind of look directly at the screen of the editor while you're talking to them and not have to always be kind of like crouching over somebody or sitting next to them. So there are good things and bad.
How do you make sure that each episode has the same editing style when you do have so many hands touching them, different editors, I know you had to divide and conquer as well in terms of just helming the creative, but the visual language, the rhythm, the humor, did you have a finishing editor polishing each one, or what was that process? And
I think that the thing that really helped with that process is what Nicole's alluding to, which was like building times in the edit schedule for all the editors to watch things together. And then honestly, Nicole, Ted, or I, and then sometimes other editors would say like, here's why we really like that sequence. Here's why this scene really works. Or here's a rule that we're going to make up about how we introduce a new location, where we put our title cards for the locations, the lower thirds, for example. So we were kind of building a style guide as we went along. And then we would have, assistant editors that were pulling all of the shots of the office together. And there would be a shared sequence so that all the editors would know if we need shots of Larry's office, this is the sequence I pull it out of. And it allowed people to sort of keep things organized. But I really think the only way to build that kind of cohesion was for people to talk about what worked and what didn't work in each episode. That's my take on it. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think we did kind of have these somewhat unspoken but then spoken rules. And there would be a thing where it's like if somebody came up with something that we just never did it that way otherwise in the series, if it didn't have like a very specific story purpose for doing that, then we would be like, no, that's breaking this rule because of this way. And like, unless, every now and then there might have been like a good argument to maybe break a rule because it was going to help the story or it was going to play with an expectation in a certain way. So it was dramatically effective to do that. But 9 times out of 10, we would just kind of be like, no, remember, we have the rule that we don't do X, Y, or Z, so we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to reconfigure this scene to not break form.
But also sometimes, Ruben, you should speak to this, because also sometimes you editors were meeting without us, right? To talk about how annoying we were, or to like make your own plans.
Yeah, we had little like breakout sessions where it's like to vent to each other, editor to editor. But it was good just to build morale and to watch some stuff and, give each other's opinions on this or that. And I think in general with the directors and everything, we had like breakout moments where we'll watch the entire series of what everybody's doing and then provide notes and talk about it so that we were always familiar with what each other's doing. I think too, for like with the B-roll was always funny because the editor used that shot and you had it in your edit. You're like, dang, I got to use this, or, like, can I get to this new shot before that? Or actually, director, can you go out and shoot this? And this is like specifically for me, so like nobody else can get it. Those are fun.
That's the danger of still being in Philadelphia. And I would be like, all right, Ruben, we're going to go get this shot, and go get that. I'm going to go back to this crime scene and get this shot, that we need. Then you're like never quite done shooting until it has to go to the online.
Yeah, I think something that may have helped actually unwittingly in a way is that in the beginning, when we were in kind of our roughest stage, when the editors came on, we started people doing storyline edits before we even got to like episode breakdown edits. Like we had a sense of like what storylines would probably go in what episodes. And so we would start the editors on just getting the stories working first. And sometimes those stories jumped episodes, or just because of the way the schedule was in the beginning, someone was going to work on a story that wasn't necessarily going to be part of their episode later. Things just had to shift around just because of that. So from the beginning to later, there was a lot of trading off of things, and which we give our team a lot of credit, because there wasn't, that people were very cool to just kind of trade their work and to hand it over and to trust that it was going to go well. But I think it gave people a sense of, in the beginning, just a little, they got their eyes on a little bit of everything and kind of had a sense on a little bit of what everybody was working on. And so in some ways, I think, just moving stuff around kind of created a little bit of cohesion or a little bit of understanding of how what people eventually worked on as maybe their key episode would, impact the greater whole.
I love the idea of creating a visual language to show certain things. Ruben, you had mentioned, slamming doors and asking to turn the camera off and incorporating that into the series. Despite all the great proximity and access that that you all got. What we don't see is how often you're asked to turn the camera off and what you don't have access to. What was the percentage there? Was it, open door policy most of the time, or did you have to shut off more often than you wanted to? Ted, Nicole.
Oh, sure. There were plenty of times where we had to turn the camera off, and basically the way it would work is that, we'd be in a room filming, and there are certain things that just by law, they couldn't allow us to either be in the room for or to record. And so there was kind of a freestanding rule that if somebody thought that something they were going to say would trip into that territory, then they would just kind of turn to us, say, hey, could you please turn the camera off? We would turn it off. They would say whatever they would need to say, or they would kick us out depending on, if it was something that legally we couldn't even hear. And then we would go back on. And we kind of had this, gentleman's agreement, for lack of a better word, that we were going to follow through to that. And in some ways, we kind of had this visual cue that, in some ways I think kind of like helped, make the room more comfortable. So there was no time to lob everybody. We're following people around doing real work, doing real meetings. And so when we're recording sounds, we're doing everything on a boom. So a big boom is being whipped around a room really quickly as everybody's talking. And Yoni always made sure to leave the camera light on, so that when they would ask us to go off, they would have these visual cues. The boom would go down, from above their heads, and the camera light would go off. And I think it was just like this reassurance that yes, we're doing what we said we were going to do. We're not surreptitiously trying to record you. Whereas if we had actually been able to lob everybody, I think there would have been some trust issues. There would have been probably they wouldn't have been so sure that we maybe weren't trying to do something surreptitious. So in some ways it kind of created this visual language. And then also it kind of created this visual language between us, whoever was shooting or whoever was doing sound at any given moment, where we would kind of, if somebody had the boom, that you could kind of use it as a gesturing device to kind of say hey, or there's something happening over here, I think we should check this out. Or the person with the camera could be moving it and kind of giving glances. And we had this kind of unspoken language between us. And we typically only had a 2-person crew going at any given moment. And we had to kind of develop these little quiet visual ways for us to communicate in the room.
And I'll just say very quickly, the unique thing about it is that the three of us, I think we're all interchangeably doing stuff. I mean, there's a beautiful moments of episode 1 that Nicole shot, and there are scenes. I think the only thing I didn't do was really do much sound, unfortunately, but Ted and Nicole shot tons of parts of this series. And that meant that there was sort of a flexibility about oh, someone needs to go to Texas, Nicole can go to Texas and shoot it too. It just meant that we were all sort of all hands on deck in a way. And I think we all trusted each other that we were going to do the best we could with it, except not trusting Yoni to do sound.
We have a clip we wanted to play from episode 106. It was one, speaking of which, in which you didn't have full access. You were able to make lemonade from lemons and get a great scene out of it. The scene features Councilwoman Maria Sanchez, who is an ally of Larry's and somewhat of a mentor to him in the political world. But here she gets fed up when Larry blows the opportunities she creates for him to connect with constituents. So this is sort of her come to Jesus moment, first with Larry's staffer and then with Larry. And you weren't able to get audio access to the latter. So let's take a look at that clip.
I want him to be successful. Every meeting I go to, your boy, your boy, your boy, your boy, Yeah, he's my boy. But until I can be reassured that he gets what happened, I'm not going to put no more political equity on the street.
So how did this scene go from, being a few B-roll shots to a really powerful breakup, so to speak?
I think they made up. I don't think it was a breakup. Sorry. Go on, Ted.
Spoiler.
No, that was one of those situations where, we of course desperately wanted access to go into that meeting, but they were not interested in doing that. I think they needed to speak very frankly to each other and didn't want to have to, think about the camera. And, that was one of those moments where, we'd kind of begged for the access. We didn't get it in that moment. And then as soon as we realized that where they were going to sit down was through a window, and that we could film them through the window. I remember Yoni and I looking at each other, and we kind of had the conversation almost right on the spot, where we kind of realized the opportunity that we had. That, that scene previously where Maria's talking to Larry's aide, Mike, if you watch the entire scene, she really kind of lays it to him in no uncertain terms how she's feeling. And we kind of realized even on the spot, they were like, oh, she's, she couldn't say it any more forcefully or dramatically than she says it to Mike. And we already know we have that moment. We could play this whole scene visually. So whereas, we could have just walked away and be like, they're not going to let us in, I guess we'll leave. But as soon as we realized that we could see them through the window, we just kind of realized that this is, in some ways, this was actually better. And so we made it a point to just stand there and just shoot the entire thing.
And the funny thing is, I'm thinking about it now, there's other examples of this, like episode 4 rather, you guys were not allowed into the judges meeting, and you shot through the window of the courthouse, which is like maybe legally on the edge. And there was another time once with the scene that didn't get in, that I went to the rooftop of another building, I remember now, to try and shoot across the window. So it's like, you're always looking for ideas of perspective and like who's in the room and who's out of the room. And I do think that part of it is like, with a show like ours that is so much about being in these very dense policy meetings where people are talking about acronyms and real policy issues, that sometimes you actually need to breathe and let body language tell the story and let score tell the story. And sometimes that would be, hard for us, because we were like, let's get more information and let's get more stuff in there. But you realize that like it's fatiguing for the audience in a way if you just keep piling that onto people. So sometimes those closed door moments, as long as we could find an evocative visual, and as long as we could find a score with Dan Deacon, our composer, that would take it to another level. Sometimes those are actually like gifts. But at the time, I think Ted and I probably felt, when we were shooting that scene, felt crushed. We're like, we missed it. This is not going to work. We don't have the storyline anymore. I remember like leaving that day, like not thinking it was not a good day when that happened. It's only with the context of like 6 months, a year later, fresh eyes from the editor, that you start to see it differently.
It's also a bit of a blessing in disguise, because the scene with Mike was so just raw and powerful that if Ted and Yoni had been in the room for the Larry Maria conversation, maybe they would have, we would have felt like we had to use that conversation because it was sort of about Larry's character. But we wouldn't have been able to use both, and so this actually gave us a chance to kind of lean in further into the moment that Maria had with Mike in a different way, rather than sort of have the same beat repeat twice, which would have, that also happens a lot, and it's heartbreaking. We had tons of meetings, where they'd be talking about something very dynamically, but it's like in any office, you talk about things a lot of different times, and inevitably you only get to choose, one of those conversations to sort of highlight. So it's also nice sometimes to have your choices pared down for you when you're kind of swimming in too many options sometimes.
Yeah, Yoni, you mentioned music as well, and scoring plays a big part here, especially when there's lack of that audio and access. A lot of nonfiction TV series don't get to have original music. So what was your process, and how important was it to you to be able to have that original score throughout?
I'm going to throw it to Ted, actually.
It was exciting to work with Dan. I mean, he was incredible. And the amount of work that the man turned around in the amount of time we had is just incredible. But, we had a pretty strong, like, musical kind of, I don't know, I guess, vision or rules for the project going forward. So like, so like in that scene, for instance, like there was kind of a rule going forward that I was very much a stickler about, which was no piano. There's going to be no piano in the score whatsoever, because I have this very, very strong feeling that piano music is overused in documentary scores, and that you know, when it's time to be sad, you hear a couple piano keys going like this, and then now everybody knows it's time to be sad. And so I just wanted us to make sure that we were never going to do that. So that was like a limitation, which I think was frustrating sometimes, to never use piano. But
that was one of those rules. Like Ted would have the piano rule, and I would have my drone rule.
Yeah,
not to use drones. And probably you could have gotten away with a little bit of drone. You probably could have gotten away with a little bit of piano, but we were just not going to do it.
Totally. We were just absolutists on certain things. But with the what we kind of worked out with Dan, and what we wanted to do is, we know we were interested in having a score that was going to kind of like, that was going to be associated with Larry and his team. And we had decided that we wanted something a little more modern, something, more earnest, that we decided was going to be this kind of like electronic score, which Dan is just, a genius at. And so that kind of language would usually go with like Larry and the characters that are associated with his team. And then in terms of characters who are in the opposition, we had this more traditional orchestral score, partly because we wanted to be able to contrast them. We wanted to be able to contrast different storylines and different changes of places. So you would hear certain instruments and know that you were in a different storyline, that we had changed. They were going to help cue that, we were moving on. And then we also realized too that, having these different, instruments from the orchestral side and from the other side also meant that, we could, because we had this kind of like wide musical language, that we had an opportunity to kind of play with tone a lot more. Whereas, like if you're more limited, there's kind of only maybe so many emotions that you can really evoke out of it. And we were really trying to use music when possible to kind of maybe play against. See, like, most everything we were dealing with was very heavy. These are very serious issues. But for dramatic purposes, we didn't want the entire note of the entire thing to feel really heavy all of the time, because then you're never actually feeling it. Right? It's like if it's this constant and there's nothing to contrast it with, you never actually get to find that feeling. So we wanted to be able to have, a lot of musical options to choose from. So sometimes we could play against, the moment, and we could go other ways, so that we could really save those really heavy or serious moments for when it really mattered for the story, such as one that you just saw there.
I want to talk about the approach you took towards the subjects in the film, and the thoughtfulness around topics of mass incarceration and police brutality, among others. And as we mentioned before, we have a clip from episode 107, which Ruben edited. The episode centers around David Jones, who was a disarmed Black man who is killed by a Philly police officer. And in this scene, we have his family viewing the footage for the first time. So we're going to play that clip. For our audience, we don't show the actual moment of death, but it is a difficult moment, and we'll be discussing the choices that your team made and the approach you took in editing the scene. So let's play that clip.
Okay. Did you guys have any questions, or should we just get this video shown? All right. You're gonna see David come in on his bike up here, and then you'll see the police car come this way, and then it'll be off screen, and then you'll see the firing and everything up in that area, okay? And David will be running what looks to be towards us. Do you guys want me to keep playing it?
Where?
Why is he putting his knee on him all like that? That's crazy.
Yeah, what? Yeah, what was?
They put his hand, what are they doing?
Yeah, what?
Look like they're trying to handcuff him or something.
Why they keep flipping?
Why they not putting him in the car? Arm all up. Which one is Paul now? Did he help put him in the car?
He did.
This is unbelievable.
How is he justified to shooting?
That's the question.
Now, Ruben, you edited the scene and you could have taken it in a different direction. What were the choices you made to get to the heart of the story, but to not exploit the trauma and make it a spectacle of death?
Yeah, I think it was very fortunate from early on. Like Ted said, they roughed out the storylines. The editors that were already on roughed out the storylines, so we had I had a base to go off of. And I think just from talks with everybody in general, like we were against from jump, like just showing the video in its entirety, and more so try to focus on the reactions of the family and like what they're going through, because at the end of the day, it's a traumatic experience for them. So you don't want to, glorify it or anything like that. And I know I had separate conversations with Nicole, like, are we wrong for showing the grief? Should we not even show the grief? Stuff like that. And I think it clearly came down to the family members being okay with this, like, them seeing the scene and being okay with us showing the process. And I think in general, this is a bird's eye view from the audience being able to see something like this, to where it's like, it's one, their family member has passed away at the hands of a cop. Two, like you never get to see this process of how this goes when a cop is charged, a family that has to deal with this. You have to go over all the legal procedures. There's even a moment that's not in the cut where like one of the family members is like, he didn't even read him his Miranda rights. And, Tracy's like, oh, no, that's just TV. So like certain stuff like that, to where there's an ignorance to this type of stuff and how this type of stuff works. So we definitely wanted to show some of that, but also see like that they're grieving and that they don't know how to process what just happened, as to be expected, but also play it to where this is a sensitive topic and moment, and we're not just trying to be like, oh, here's the tape. Okay, everybody, that's it. We just show the tape and we can move on. Like, there's much more, it's much more delicate than that.
Yeah, the approach our team took is different than so much of what we see on other series and networks. Pat Offerheide in the chat mentioned the true crime genre, and that approach is so sensational and doesn't always consider the responsibility to subjects and victims and the community. How much of the team's approach to the project in general had that at the forefront of your decisions?
I mean, I can just add that I think this question of working in collaboration with people and like consent is pretty important. And I think it's conditioned on ideas of power and agency. For example, there were a lot of people in the DA's office who did not give us consent, or police officers who did not necessarily give us express consent, but they're in the background of a shot, for example. Those are government employees doing their job on government property. And then there's scenes like the one that you just saw, which is a private family that never chose to be in this situation, would have given anything not to be in this situation. And so for scenes like that, there would be, what you're seeing is sort of the tip of the iceberg in the show. What you're not seeing is sort of the trips to their house without cameras to talk to them about it ahead of time, conversations that the prosecutors had with them to really confirm without us even in the room that they wanted to participate in this project. And then even after we shot it, showing them this material before it was broadcast to make sure that they weren't seeing it for the first time on national TV. So I think we, tried to build in layers of that, where ultimately I think what you're watching in these kinds of scenes is not what happened to this family. There's a lot we don't show and didn't see, but you're seeing sort of what in our relationship you're seeing sort of a document of our relationship with that family, with the Jones family.
Yeah, I think we see that throughout the series, not just a scene. We see it in how you treat characters like LaTanya Myers, who will actually be a panelist in the PHILLY D.A engagement panel coming up. You've been so intentional about giving agency to those who share their stories with you. And I think that's also definitely part of the approach and training you bring as independent documentary filmmakers working within public media. Did you have a strong sense of that going into the project when you were pitching commercial networks, for example? Did you have others that wanted you to take it in a different direction, more murder TV than the emphasis on progressive politics and criminal justice reform?
No one ever asked us to push in that direction. That I think maybe it's an easier sell had we naturally just fit into the true crime genre, because there's just a lot of that, and it seems to be making people money, and places oftentimes just want the thing that's the most surefire, familiar thing that they know they can get viewers and make money from. But we didn't get even like an ounce of pressure to push this in that direction. I think people knew, I think we were kind of sure going in about what kind of show we wanted to make. And so it was very much part of our presentation and conversations. And I think people, I mean, it was an interesting thing going back to the earlier thing. Like, I think even places who didn't think this was a fit, like we had a lot of people who were excited and then said, but our corporate mission, like, we don't know that this can fit into it. But this is like, clearly this will be a great show, and like, it seemed genuine, like someone's going to make this. It just can't be our corporation. But they weren't trying to say, but if you do this and that, then maybe we could.
Sure.
And I do think, to the question about relationships, so much of what, like Yoni was alluding to, of what you're doing as a filmmaker is building relationships and getting to know people and talking to them when the camera is not there. And I think, one of the biggest rewards, I think, of making this project was meeting so many of the people that we did, and then also, once we were able to show them, either before, for the primary characters, showing folks things before it went to air, and hearing from people that they do feel accurately represented, that they, whether they really liked it or kind of liked it or were fine with it, whatever it is, that, hearing people feel that their story was accurately portrayed is like a very, was just is just, I think, one of the best parts of making something like this. So I think, making sure that those relationships that and they're difficult, right? These are relationships that last, for years with people, that sometimes you meet somebody on a grumpy day or, whatever it is, they can have ups and downs, but it is something that you're kind of invested in for the long haul. And you're asking a lot from people to not only, share with you, but also to share in moments when, when they're going through something difficult, right? Because those are the moments that become story points, whether, in episode 4, if LaTanya is going to her probation termination hearing, she was very nervous that day. And it takes a lot from people to participate in this. So I think, I just have a great amount of, appreciation and respect for all the people who participated, and feel like, I'm just glad that it seems to have worked out so far.
Well,
yeah, and it's probably worth saying too that, a lot of times in filming with folks, we would, usually figure it out ahead of time, like, oh, hey, you have this thing coming up, maybe tomorrow or the next day. Are you okay with us coming? Okay, cool, we're gonna come. And then sometimes, we're constantly having to like check in with folks, because sometimes, you kind of plan something, you have it all ready to go, and then you show up, and for whatever reason, someone just changed their mind, or they're having a bad day, or they just want to talk, they don't want to be on camera. And, it can be hard because you're scheduling like equipment and time and this and that. But, it's just one of those things that like, we're constantly just like always like having to defer to the folks that we were filming. Because at the end of the day, it was their story. It was their likeness on camera. It's their life, and so, even when we would have things, kind of planned and worked out, and we kind of thought we had talked about all of it, sometimes other things would come up, and, we just always had to go with it.
Sure. Well, so episode 8 just aired a couple of weeks ago. You're finally at the other end of a long journey. Are you inspired to do more series? Are you going back to feature films?
I personally love, I mean, like I said, I've mostly worked in the feature space, and I want to keep doing both, but I thought it was really exciting being able to tell this complex of a story and this many different stories, and not all stories are meant to be told in 90 minutes. And it was nice to have the freedom to explore something longer.
I'll say in complete candor that I think one of the challenges of this series is that it was very all-encompassing to make it this way, you know, where you have like 3 core people doing it, and like we could all do every job, so we did every job. And I think that's like a very exhausting way to build a career and build a show. And so I think one of the real like fundamental like questions that we have to ask ourselves is like, what part of this show do we like bring into our work in the future, and what do we learn from and never do again? I think that's like the real talk in terms of like how making a show like this affects your life, affects your personal relationships, affects what kind of jobs you can take. You know, it's hard to make something for this many years, even with as many great partners as we had.
Yeah, it's true. I think the storytelling possibilities of a series are incredible because there's so much that you can do with it. But as Yoni was saying, the physical, emotional, and personal toll is actually huge. You know, if we hadn't been on lockdown, we wouldn't have seen any of our friends anyway. You know, we wouldn't. You know, I barely saw my partner living in the same house. You know, for all the time that we were working on this. You know, it was a really like round the clock, nonstop, all encompassing project. And I think we're all tremendously proud of it, but it's also something that like, it's not totally sustainable. So I think, yeah, as Yoni said, I think we need to figure out how we translate this as a working process going forward.
Yeah, but I do think there's something seductive, for better or worse, of wanting to learn from it and try again and do it better. And you know, I think definitely during so much of this, I would tell myself like, when this is over, I never have to do this again, you know. But then after it's done, you kind of change your mind and you're like, no, you know, that was incredible, and I want to figure out how to do it again and how to make it more sustainable. So we'll see. I don't think we've actually, you know, in our conversations so far, we haven't cracked the code on how to do it a different way, but they are conversations that we've been having.
I think too, to touch on that real quick, as an editor from working with Steve in the past and upcoming projects, I'm always aware now that working with him, everything could pretty much turn into a series. So, you know, he always says, oh, it's going to be 90 minutes. And then, you know, so in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, this might end up being a series. So.
Any advice for filmmakers hoping to create a series? You know, those who've been working in features, but want to make the leap. Is it a steeper learning curve? What are things that you know now that you wish you knew back then?
Yeah, honestly, this is maybe a small thing, but I think something that is going to be a lesson going forward is just simply thinking about trying to find a way to divide up the schedule in a certain way for note giving. Because that's just like such a time intensive part of the process. You know, you're watching like hour-long episodes to give notes on, and, you know, it could take you easily 2 to 3 hours just to get notes on, and you may have 2 or 3 episodes you have to watch in a given night. And it was just like, that was one of those things where it was like, you know, it's kind of a simple thing to think about in terms of the scheduling, but by maybe not thinking about that in the schedule, it was incredibly punishing. So I think that's maybe like one kind of small thing just to think about, like making sure that you're factoring time in, because, you know, when you're on a scheduling, you can't stop. Everybody just has to keep going. You have to make sure that those notes are getting into the editor for the next morning, so they know like what the priorities are for the next day. And that is kind of a big thing.
Yeah, I think there's you know, one of the things that our EP Don Porter kind of warned us about when we first got into this was just how tricky it was managing notes, because we would have our own internal notes, but then, you know, a week later we'd get notes from you, Royd, and from Lois and from the folks at Topic, and then of course there's Ted and Yoni and then myself. And you know, and I think one of the challenges and something that I would hope we would do better in the future is just help streamline that that sort of funnel, so that when it reaches Ruben and the other editors, there's a very clear path forward, because I think, it's difficult to make anything with a lot of voices. And I'm sure that was, I know that was something that could be frustrating for them at times. So I think just sort of figuring out how to do this kind of ballet of having so many pieces of the puzzle kind of at different stages all at the same time is an interesting choreography for somebody to master.
Yeah, I mean, I'll second that. for any series, if you do master that or get that secret formula for tackling notes, please do share. We do have some time for questions from the audience, and if you have questions, please continue to ask them in the chat. I'm going to start with one. As you mentioned earlier, the series format provides a way to share varying perspectives from a complex system, about a complex system. Were there storylines and characters that didn't make it in that you wish you could have?
Yes. Definitely. I mean, I at some point, I don't know who said it, but it's like we could have made 10 different other series out of the material that we had. Not with more 8 hours. I mean, we could have reconfigured what we had into so many different permutations. And there were stories that I think in some ways are just as powerful, if not more powerful than what's in the series. But because life happens in the way that it does, some of them are still in legal purgatory, and we're not going to get an answer in the next 2 years, or maybe 10 years, or maybe ever. And there just weren't enough beats to merit an entire episode about it. Yeah. But the short answer is yes.
Yeah. For Josh, what tips can you give to filmmakers, including producers, about the best timing for going to broadcasters and partners? How important is it to get a certain stage before reaching out? I know you already had some grants in hand.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a one size fit all answer at all. I think it's knowing your project and knowing what your strengths are and what your strengths are now and what they could be later. I guess I think there's some series that probably just on concept you can sell, and it may actually be easier to just go in before you just with the access and the storyline and just say we just need a partner and make it from the beginning. And some things need probably a little bit more to be proven, and where you need to go in with tape, with sample scenes, a sizzle, whatever it is, to show like this is what this is, and this is why it's good, because it'll be hard for people to make the leap otherwise. But like I said, I think unfortunately it's really hard to get all the way with series. I mean, on features, usually my answer to that would be like, if you're early career filmmaker, like make it the best thing you possibly can, premiere it, and then sell it. And unfortunately, I think it's probably different right now, and this could change in a year. It feels hard to sell it at the end. So it's probably that sweet spot of like, how far can you get it? How much do you need to do to be able to really prove that this is something everyone wants, and then get them on board.
For Yoni, Ted, and Nicole, one thing that filmmakers aren't necessarily trained in is how to manage a team and how to figure out how to work together as collaborators that are supportive of everyone's personal and professional needs. Can you share some learnings about how you learned how to lead your team and work together?
That's a good question. In some ways, I think Ruben might be best poised to answer that, if we actually did that or not. If we actually did that well. Honestly, I think we were constantly, like maybe learning different things we had to do. But we tried to do our best. It's when you're under a really tight schedule and everything is kind of on the line and you have to meet this date. Like it's amazing how quick your morals can be challenged, and so we constantly, I think, had to like ground ourselves and come back to and just making sure that we were like checking in with people. One, this is very serious, heavy stuff that we're working on. Like, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Is this we don't want to take it for granted that the stuff that you're cutting is like really really triggering big stuff, because it is, and we should talk about that. And we also just wanted to make sure that as we're working with people, that like they knew they could take time for certain things. If they were feeling really upset, hopefully they felt like they could talk to us, take a day here, take a day there, do whatever they needed to do. We would always be open to working with people's schedules as much as possible. There were a lot of, we just did our best to be, I think, as human as possible with everybody, given the circumstances that we were working under, which is a kind of an inhuman schedule, which is pretty common in our industry. Yeah, and honestly, we were kind of just doing our best and just responding, like if something wasn't working for somebody, then okay, then let's figure out like what is going to work and just do our best. But if there's any metric, I guess it's that, just thinking like what is the most human you can be with everybody. And especially we're also working under we're working under COVID conditions, which, we had none of us had ever experienced before. And just trying to remind ourselves and everyone that like these are difficult circumstances to work under, and we don't necessarily talk about it, and we have to just kind of remember that like this is weighing down on all of us. But I think at the end of the day, finding moments where we can just like like at the beginning of a team meeting, even just simply like giving everybody time to just chit chat for a few minutes and just talk and just be people and not necessarily talk about the project. Those little things like really help, and they add up. And I think just like not taking those moments for granted, not kind of speeding through them because we're in a hurry, were helpful. But hopefully, yeah, like I said, Ruben might have a better answer on how that actually worked out, but that's at least what we tried to do.
I'll just jump in and just say, I think one of the challenges that I think we learned both from doing it well and doing it not as well as we could have is how you balance both like having the very tight deadlines and needing to move things very quickly, but then also wanting everybody to stay and feel sort of informed across the board in terms of what's happening. Because, if things shift in one episode, they're going to impact another episode. Mm-hmm. Sometimes an editor would work on something, move on to something else, and then go back to the thing they'd previously been working on and it was different. And I think one of those challenges is how do you both respect people's time so you're not, constantly having team meetings where everybody's listening to everything that doesn't impact their work for the day, but then also finding opportunities to make sure that that people do feel sort of like included and brought along in terms of what is happening to the overall, the overall ship, even if they're just working on one piece of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that was something that at times we did well, and at times we didn't do as well, but it was definitely, I think, something that helped make the team feel more cohesive and move more smoothly when everybody was kind of just had that kind of overall awareness. But of course, there are also times when people just want to kind of have their blinders on and be focused. So you also have to kind of, carve out the space so that people can also just be doing that and not be wasting their time too.
Ruben, how did they do?
Yeah, I think overall they did great. We did from the beginning have like a WhatsApp app chat. So like constantly everybody was communicating this and that. And, a lot of times it was business. Sometimes it was just funny memes, this and that, and everybody laughing, having a laugh. And then, going back to work or whatever. So there was a constant communication that it was just, through a chat and not just like emails here or video chat here or there or there. So constantly everybody was kind of checking in on various levels. So that's definitely something I appreciated.
We have a couple more minutes left. Last question from the audience for anyone who wants to answer. After being so immersed in this project for so long, what did you learn about the criminal justice system and the possibilities for reform?
I'll take a crack at it because it's huge, and I'll just take it from like my little arena, which is filmmaking and storytelling, which is, I think, if you were to ask me in true confidence in a bar, like, does filmmaking really matter and change the conversation? I would say I hope so, but I don't really know. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole bunch of complex reasons why we're filmmakers. Some of them are to change the world, some of it's because we enjoy what we're doing and working with interesting people. But in making this project, we would often be in rooms with the people who I would say are making the change, criminal defense lawyers, prosecutors trying to reform the world, even, police officers trying to make reform. And the constant thing we heard from them was that the biggest obstacle to reform is culture change. and storytelling, and that they had great ideas of how to make change, but they were struggling and actually trying to convince communities to change entrenched ways of thinking. And I think, to me, that was a real eye-opening moment to realize that actually the storytelling does matter, and that there were DAs sitting around the room talking about like how to tell better stories to the community. And I realized that that is in effect what we can do. That is part of what our role is in trying to effectuate change, is to change the cultural conversation around the ideas of public safety and crime.
We are out of time, but that's a perfect segue, because I want to encourage everyone in the audience to come back for panel 2, which is going to feature the incredible impact and engagement work done around the series that did spark conversations around the country. That's at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, and you don't want to miss it. And you can still catch PHILLY D.A. on pbs.org and the PBS app for a few more days. And thank you again to this team. Congratulations to you and all the folks who made the series happen. Thank you to AFI Docs for hosting us, and to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for your continued support. Everyone, please enjoy the rest of AFI Docs, and see you soon. Thanks again.